While the majority of the world's nations are considered democracies today, historically, the implementation of democratic systems of government has been a fairly modern development. Great Britain is often considered the first modern democracy in history. But how did this happen, and what gave rise to democracy in the first place? Going all the way back to the 7th century, England was ruled by the monarchy, which held the most power in government, similar to the other kingdoms in Europe at the time. However, England developed a few democratic elements such as the Witan, which was an advisory council composed of nobles, who would provide advice on matters of legislation, justice, and religion to the king. Of course, the king still held the final say in all decisions. In 1215, the upset lower nobility forced King John of England to sign the landmark but often exaggerated Magna Carta, which effectively held the king accountable under the law. As well, the nobility was granted higher status and greater protection, as the Magna Carta guaranteed due process of law and established certain rights for the nobility. I say exaggerated because it's a popular misconception that it gave everyone greater freedom. In reality, the Magna Carta did not grant these rights to commoners, but it did establish a precedent in limiting the monarch's power, detracting from other regimes in Europe. Precursor parliaments formed after the Magna Carta by contesting nobles were temporarily successful in establishing representational government, with regular meetings, elected officials, statutes amended to common law, and permitted tax management, but they proved to be too weak compared to the king's power and greed. The Model Parliament, founded in 1295, solidified England's representative democracy as a guiding principle. The Assembly Parliament consisted of elected representatives of different social classes across England, including the House of Commons, which represented the lower class, and the House of Lords, consisting of nobility and clergy. Each house would separately discuss political matters, and they would make proposals to the king, negotiate, and even petition the king on those matters. Although, much like the Witan, the king still held the majority of power and made the final decisions. On a relevant note, the House of Commons being elected by the commoners was the first sustained example of what we would consider a democracy. Over time, the king started to rely on support of Parliament for making decisions and policies, and the people's interests started to be represented for once. The English monarchy was unique in acquiring legitimacy by accepting concessions to the nobility and its formed parliament, in fear of deposition. Despite its great progress, it's important to note that the model parliament was still limited in terms of inclusivity, as the House of Commons only consisted of the wealthiest commoners, and members of the House of Lords were often appointed by the king. But over the course of decades, the model parliament grew more and more power in government, like the ability for the House of Commons to impeach ministers of the king, or the ability for both houses to reject taxes and laws. During the reign of King Edward III, England was entangled in the 100 Years' War against France, allowing Parliament to embolden itself. It was established that no law or tax could be made without the consent of both houses. Parliament was even able to impeach ministers of the king from the House of Lords. Well, that wraps it up for the medieval period in British history. I think it's a good place to stop for now, so the next video will continue with the Tudors, the Enlightenment, and even a civil war. Thank you so much for watching and stay tuned for the next video.